Hello, welcome to today's webinar. I'm going to allow a number of other people to join in before I start. So I'll give it a couple of minutes and we'll start. Okay, I've not had many people join in the last few seconds, so I think we'll start now. Well, welcome to today's webinar, Introduction to Lean Startup. My name is Nigel Spencer. I manage services here at the Business and IP Centre at the British Library in London. The presentation that I'm going to be going through today will be sent out to all of you with the various links in it and the other reference points I'm going to be making. So if you don't want us to send it to you, please let us know, but I'll be sending it to everybody unless I hear otherwise. So I work at the Business and IP Centre at the British Library, and clearly because you've booked through the website, you'll have some awareness of what we do. But really, the centre is a facility within the British Library in London, which is aimed at helping people who have an idea for a business to take their business idea forward, based on the collection of information that we have here, but also on a range of services such as workshops, webinars like this, advice, and a number of other things that we do to help people to, really it's about helping people to make sound decisions about their business and their business model. For a number of years, we used this as one of our promotional images, which was a shed. The idea being that you go inside a shed with your idea or an invention, you work on it in isolation, and then you launch it on the world. I mean, of all the models images we could have used, possibly is the worst. If you think about the way that innovation is changing, because these days there's a far greater emphasis on engagement with customers, collaboration, and sharing ideas and testing ideas at a much earlier stage. The idea behind that being that if you share your ideas and you get feedback, you have a far better chance of being able to deliver products and services that people actually want. So we've been interested for a while in more collaborative innovation, and there are a number of models and tools and approaches. The one that we found, I think, the most interesting has been Lean Startup, because this combined a kind of open and collaborative approach to developing a business with a scientific approach which takes in testing and engagement with customers. Okay, sorry, a few technical issues there. I can carry on now. What I was saying was a Lean Startup really combines the kind of open and collaborative approach with a scientific approach around collecting information within a kind of process. So now we're looking to try to incorporate Lean Startup into a number of the ways that we deliver services at the Business and IP Centre, and hence this webinar today. Now, the aim of this webinar is to give you a very top-level overview of Lean Startup. We're not experts ourselves, although we are learning a lot about it. The aim is to introduce you to some of the major concepts, some of the overall concepts behind it, and some of the ideas that you'll come across, but also to give you reference points that you can go to find out more about this. So it really is a top-level introduction, and I'm hoping that you find it sufficiently interesting to go out and do sort of more research into this yourself. Now, Lean Startup, the origins of it come from where the term was coined by Eric Ries in his book The Lean Startup, 2012. And here's a picture of Eric, 2011 rather. Here's a picture of Eric, and here's a quote from him, which is, I think, sort of summarizes some of the key principles with that being successful in a startup business is not about having the right genes. It's not about luck, but it's actually about following a process which can be learned and which can be taught. And Lean Startup really is an overall approach, or a set of approaches that can help you to follow that particular process. Now, Lean Startup helps you provides a model for developing a business idea based on exposing a product or service to the market as early and as cheaply as possible. It has its origins in lean manufacturing technologies pioneered by Toyota, and it was initially developed for the technology sector. And that's where it's been most widely adopted. But we believe, and I think many others do, that the principles can be applied to differing levels across a whole range of sectors. So I may often refer to the word, or I may often refer to products in this webinar, but the word service could also be applicable. Now, Lean Startup enables you to start a process of iteration and learning, which increases the likelihood of developing a product with features that customers actually want. Or, importantly, to identify the lack of demand for such a product before time and money is wasted. So it's based around exposing your product to the market as early and as cheaply as possible. But it's not about launching things cheaply specifically, but it's about ensuring that time and money is most efficiently spent by testing those ideas against the market. So it's primarily about learning rather than building and selling. So most of the models I'm going to be showing you today are very much around learning about a market rather than actually starting the process of developing and building a business. It's also about understanding customers and their intent before you build anything, and about minimizing uncertainty. So the more that you know about the market you're working in, how customers are likely to behave in relation to your product or service, the more likely it is that the idea will be successful. At the heart of it is the principle that all learning and knowledge gained about customers and the market is valuable and is progress, and that's how the success of these tools can actually be applied. Part of that process is to identify a number of hypotheses or assumptions which you can test through talking to customers, conducting experiments, and carrying out research. And it's this research element that is of particular interest to us in a library, because clearly that's something that we're heavily involved in ourselves. In identifying what those assumptions or hypotheses are, some people find it useful to ask yourself this question, which is, if my business idea is to be a success, what things need to be true, and to test those. Another key principle is that of iteration, which effectively is taking small steps in developing an idea. This is sometimes known as the feedback loop, which is a loop that you go through which involves building something that you can go out and test, measuring the response to that, and learning from that. And from that learning, going back through that loop again. It's very much at odds with the idea or the approach in which a business plan is produced, which seeks to project the performance of a product or service years into the future. So it's about small steps based on learning. A quote from Scott Cook, the founder of Intuit, which is, if there's something I've learned in the past 4 years, it's the power of iteration. Rapidly create, test, and change. A quote from E.L. Doctorow, the American author, which is actually obviously talking about writing here, but actually I think makes the same point, which is that writing is like driving in the fog. You can only see as far as the headlights, but you can make the whole journey that way. So the principle, so that's the kind of overall philosophy behind Lean Startup. It could also be summarized as avoiding a position of saying, I wish I'd known that sooner. Now, I'm now going to move on to 3 key tools that can be used. The order I'm going to present them is not an indication of a sequence or any kind of priority. You could be using them simultaneously, and they do overlap, as you'll see. It's useful to remember that Lean Startup is not a kind of linear process, but a series of twists and turns. It's more like a plate of spaghetti than a ruler. So the tools I'm going to be looking at are the business model canvas, customer development, and the minimum viable product. I'm going to start off by looking, what I will also say is that these 3 tools are not the only tools that exist, but these are 3 that I think you'll see being referred to possibly most frequently in literature. So I'm going to start off with the business model canvas. Now, the business model canvas was introduced by, or was developed by Alex Osterwalder. And at the heart of this is the concept of the business model, because that kind of underpins this. And Alex identifies there as being 9 elements or 9 building blocks to a business model. Business model really is how he describes it, is a rationale of how an organization creates, delivers, and captures value. It's really, it's all of the different elements that go into developing a business, a successful business. He identifies there as being 9 building blocks or 9 different elements to this. The ones in blue at the top would be the more outward-facing things that the customers will actually see. The 4 at the bottom, the grey ones, are the things that are happening behind the scenes to enable the business to deliver the more front-facing elements at the top. So I'll kind of run through these quite briefly. From the top, first of all, the customer segments. Now, customer segments really are the people to whom you are looking to offer a product or service. These are people who will have a problem that needs to be solved in relation to delivering a particular aspect of their business or their personal lives, or there will be a way in which those particular tasks could be delivered more effectively than they are now. So it could be a problem that people actually have already perceived as existing, or it could be a way of being able to enhance the lives of those people. So you're looking to identify certain groups which would benefit from these solutions, that have these problems to begin with. The second is a value proposition, which is how your product or service will actually solve that problem or enhance that particular person or person's life. And generally, most business ideas will start with one of these 2 elements. So that it'll either be a problem that someone has perceived through, I don't know, taking a flight, any part of their kind of working or daily lives, or something which was where so that would be starting off with a customer segment, or some skill, experience, knowledge, material, or something which people have identified as potentially offering a solution. And so that would become a solution really in search of a problem. So usually, quite a large amount of time we'll be looking at customer segments and value propositions, because that's really is at the heart of whether people will actually buy your product or service. The third element is a channel, which is how you will reach your customer segments with your service or product, which could be online, it could be through a retail establishment. How are you going to reach them? The relationships is how you're looking to retain business from that particular customer. How are you going to actually keep a relationship with them, which could be based on a number of frequent small transactions, one large transaction followed by customer support. You have to identify how you're going to actually keep those people using your service or buying your products. And the revenue streams are how your customers will actually pay you, how you'll receive money for delivering that particular value proposition to those customers. So looking at the next 4, the key activities are things that you will have to carry out yourself in order to deliver your value proposition. The key resources are the resources to which you will need to have access to deliver that. So these resources could be it's actually quite a broad category, because they could be things like materials, they could be expertise, they could actually also be things like image or brand, but they could also be things like intellectual property. So you may need to have a patent in place to be able to deliver or produce a particular type of equipment, for example, or use a particular brand name. The partners are people that you'll need to work with. So people that are either providing services to help you or helping to provide you with materials. Things that you can't actually do yourself, or you choose not to do yourself. And the cost structure are the costs of all the elements above that. And so you basically where you end up with a reasonably simple calculation, which is if your revenue streams are going to be more than your cost structure, then theoretically you're going to have a business which is successful. And under each of these categories, you're going to be making a number of assumptions. And so when you're looking to go out and research and talk to customers and carry out other forms of research, you're looking to turn those assumptions into things for which you actually have some evidence. Now, the business model canvas is a template for developing and documenting all aspects of a business model. So basically, it's a visual representation of these building blocks. The format of a canvas, I'll be showing you the canvas in a minute, but the format compels you to keep ideas simple and focused because it's a very simple focus. It can also be used at all stages from initial idea generation through to further development. You can actually also use the canvas as a way of assessing a particular existing service or product or business model. Another important element to it is that it's a dynamic living document that reflects ongoing changes and iterations. The important thing about having a document where you see all these elements, all these building blocks in one place, is that you can see the interrelationships. So you can't easily go and change one element without addressing the impact that might have on the rest of it. So if you change your customer segment group, then that may well change the channel that you have to use or the nature of the relationship that you choose to have with them. This is what the canvas looks like. It's often best used as a physical tool with post-it notes, although there are electronic versions of this. It can be downloaded free on a Creative Commons license, and the URL will be in one of the slides I'll show you in a minute, so you can download it yourself and you can use it. And you can get to play with it like this. You can do it as a group exercise. You can do it yourself. It's very useful if you're working with, let's say, business advisors. You can say, well, this is my canvas at the moment. These are the things I'm working on. These are the things and you can start to use it as a way of populating the evidence that you're getting to underpin each of these assumptions. This is an example of quite a simple example of a canvas which is used by Alex Osterwalder in his book Business Model Generation, which shows you the Nespresso with the business model for the Nespresso product. The Nespresso, many of you will have Nespresso machines at home, and these are used as basically what they're offering is a way of having high quality coffee easily at home. So working kind of through these, starting with the customer segment, they've identified households here. So this is not a business, this is not a product which is to be used by businesses. One assumes that when they were working through this, they were actually probably defining what kind of households in a little bit more detail, looking at particular demographics, but households really is who they're targeting. The value proposition, the quality coffee is delivered through two sort of items. One are the machines which are used to make the coffee, and pods are the way in which the coffee is produced, is delivered to the machine and then used to create the drink. And there are different elements for the machines and for the pods. So the channels that are used are, the machines can be bought through a whole range of different retailers, high street, online. The pods can only be bought through more controlled outlets, which is through either a mail order or call center, through the Nespresso website, or through Nespresso stores. The relationship is based very much on the fact that you have to use those pods in order to use the machine. You can't use other forms of coffee or other forms of pod or any other form of coffee delivery mechanism within an espresso machine. The revenue stream come from sales of machines and from sales of pods on an ongoing basis. Now, the key activities that are delivered by the company themselves, one is the production of the pods, the marketing and branding. I mean, George Clooney has been used in adverts. Obviously, that will have been a reasonably expensive means of doing it. So obviously, the brand is considered to be particularly important. And the business to consumer distribution through the outlets. These are the things that are delivered by Nestlé themselves. The resources that they have are the distribution channels to sell the pods, the patents on the equipment, the coffee that is delivered through the pods, the brand itself, which they've obviously worked very hard to develop, and the production facilities for the pods. These aren't actually made by Nestlé themselves. These are made by somebody else. Under the key partnerships, you have the machine manufacturers and the coffee growers. And the cost structure is a combination of all these elements. So that's quite a simple example of a business model canvas as used, as applied to Nespresso. And one of the issues of working with the business model canvas is that an awful lot of work will go into looking at the customer segment and value proposition element of it. And there will be a lot of work going into defining what will appear as short headings or statements within the canvas. There is a tool that can help you work through these elements in more detail. It's called the Value Proposition Canvas. Really, it's a plug-in for the business model canvas. Now, this is what it looks like. And this starts off by breaking the customer segment into a series of customer jobs and then gains. So customer jobs are things that people will actually have to carry out. And then you've got gains and pains. So you've got gains, which is ways those jobs could have been actually carried out better, or pains, which are things which are currently perceived as being difficult about delivering that particular job. And job could be anything that somebody wishes to carry out, whether they're doing it as part of their professional business life or whether they're doing it as part of their daily kind of personal life. Then you map across to gain creators and pain relievers, which are ways that you can actually deliver those particular tasks in a better way, or way that you can actually relieve the pain. And then these will map onto products and services. So from that, you then analyze your customer segment in more detail. We refine it down to a clear statement. And similarly, with the value proposition canvas, with the value proposition element of it, you narrow that down as well. So this works in enabling you to be able to feed those refined statements down into the canvas itself. Now, there are different versions of this. I mean, Business Model Canvas is the most well-known of these, and it was the original. There are people that have adapted this themselves that you might want to look into. Here's an example of one. This is something called the Lean Canvas, produced by someone called Ash Maurya. This is an adaptation of the Business Model Canvas that really focuses a lot more on the product, on the value proposition and customer segment element of it, rather than the bits behind the scenes, if you like. This might suit your requirements better. I mean, the principles are very much the same. It's just the emphasis is slightly different. So here's some more information about where you can find. Here are some more sources of information about all of these elements. Two key books by Alex Osterwalder, The Business Model Generation, which is the book in which he introduced the idea of the business model canvas, and then a more recent book which came out last year, which looks at the value proposition canvas and how that actually works. Also, some really useful websites that you can go and look at. Some of the videos as well that explain and talk through these models in more detail. So I strongly advise you to have a look at those. So that's the business model canvas. I'm now going to move on to the next tool, which is customer development. Customer development was initially introduced by Steve Blank. And his kind of mantra is really, there are no facts in the building, so get the hell out and talk to customers. Really what this is about the process of validating the assumptions that you've made under the categories in the business model canvas, but with particular emphasis on those that relate to customer needs and behaviors. That's customer development. Customer development, it's all about building a business model based on an understanding of customers, how your product meets their needs, and building relationships with them, which will lead to them becoming ongoing purchasers of your product or service. And it looks very much about how you actually go out and talk to people and how you collect that information about their behaviours and their particular, and help you to assess whether your particular idea for a product or service will actually be of value to them. Now, Steve Blank was initially worked within the tech company sector, and he recognised an anomaly in the way that products were being developed. And this was that all the models that existed were focusing on technical development of products. But actually, he recognised that only a small percentage of products failed because of technical problems. The main reason why products failed, in fact, this was 9 times more prevalent, was because of a lack of customers. So he set about creating a model or a structure which focused more on the customer aspect than the technical aspect. And this is customer development. So this is all about taking hypotheses and testing them with real customers. And looking to answer questions like, does my product solve a genuine pain? You may have a perception of what a pain is, but until you talk to people, you will not be able to find out whether that pain actually exists. But it could also be about convincing people that you will meet a need they didn't know they had, which is more about how things can be enhanced in a way that people possibly hadn't realized. And assuming that the first two are correct in some ways, in that you are solving a pain, that there is potentially a need or enhancement that you're offering, very importantly, does anyone care enough to actually go out and pay for it? Now, there are 3 or 4 different elements to customer development. I'm going to take the kind of 3-stage element process myself, but the first of these 3 is customer discovery, which is about identifying a fit between a product, a service, and a customer need. Customer validation, which is about identifying whether people really will actually pay and respond to your product or service idea. And customer creation, which is much more about building up your customer base and scaling up your product or service into a viable business. I'm going to focus more on the first 2 today. As you'll see, often you'll find yourself working between discovery and validation, because it may be that you aren't able to validate that people will actually purchase your product or service, and so you have to go back to the first stage. Well, I'll talk about this in a bit more detail now. The customer discovery is about getting out of the building to find potential customers to interview and test whether the pain actually exists, and to identify other pains of which you potentially were unaware. So it's very much about listening and not selling. And other key principles behind this could be, if you want to talk to people, if you want to know how people are likely to behave in the future, ask them about how they behaved in the past. So one of the kind of tips behind this that you'll see within the literature is that it's very important to phrase questions that are based on past behaviors rather than hypothetical questions about what people will do in the future. Other principles could be to ask people to talk about their lives and not your idea. You're not asking people to talk about at this stage. You're not aiming to talk about your particular solution. You're aiming to focus on their particular problem. And again, their lives will give you more information about how significant a particular a particular problem is in their life. Other things that are quite important, I think, is that when you are talking to customers, is to record precise words and not to paraphrase. This is important because if you paraphrase, you may well easily distort the information that you're getting, but also because the words that people are using, you yourself could echo back to them at a future stage when you're looking to actually sell a product or service, because the terminology could be consistent across a particular sector or group. Other elements to consider is that one opinion is not firm evidence, so you need to talk to a number of people. Another thing is, it's important to phrase questions in a way that identifies that people will often present themselves in possibly a slightly better light than they actually exist. I mean, if people ask you, if you were to be asked about the kind of food that you eat, you probably will say that you probably will give a slightly idealized version of your diet in terms of it being healthier, or the books you read may be slightly more intellectual than they actually are. People will, so you always got to try and understand that people will possibly talk in a way or present themselves in a way that that presents their best aspects rather than their true aspects. And so I think in terms of questioning, that's another important point. Another key thing about customer discovery is something that you must do yourself as a startup business. It's not something that can be really outsourced for all the reasons I mentioned, because it's important to understand the language and to be able to engage in the kind of dialogue with people that that really only you, because you're so close to it, can actually do. It's quite an interesting website. I've got a quote that I've got the URL here before. It's a YouTube video actually, and they talk, and this gives an example of good questions as opposed to bad questions. This really gives you a kind of flavour for the kind of information that you'll find when you're looking at customer development. And they identified these 3 bad questions. One, would you pay £5 per month to stream movies on the web? Problem with this question, they say, is that you're already limiting your response to £5. It is hypothetical as well, but you're also, I mean, the people would be prepared to pay 10 or 20 possibly, but you wouldn't find that out. Another bad question is, does your dog smell bad? Well, yes, that might be the case, but it might not bother you. If you're looking at the example they give here is, does your dog smell bad in relation to somebody who had some kind of dog shampoo? It may be that actually the dog smell isn't as much of a problem as hair loss or whatever, or so this already limits the range of discussion around how the dog actually smells. Another bad question is, if a cycle hire service was available cheaply, how often we use it to travel to work? Again, a much more open question would be helpful here to find out how often people travel to work, how far they travel, the current methods they use, rather than actually narrowing it down and asking this kind of a question, which is, again, is hypothetical, but also is quite narrow. So have a look at those websites, have a look at those videos, because they do actually give, I think once you see good versus kind of less good questions, it really illustrates it very well. Customer validation, this really takes place at the point when you have, from your feedback, got some evidence that you believe that you have a potential solution to a genuine pain. So the question here is, how will people actually respond in relation to that? Is the pain of significant seriousness for people to actually take action, or more importantly, to spend money? So it's really about trying to identify whether people will actually pay for a product or service based on their response to it. And so what you're looking to do is get some sort of level of buy-in. Now, one level of buy-in could be trial, so people are prepared to actually undertake some level of prepared to commit their time to trialing a new product or service. That's obviously not going to be as helpful or as useful as people actually spending money, but it does give you some evidence of commitment. Another example could be actual sales of an early version of a product or service. Another version could be crowdfunding, because crowdfunding is an example of something where people will actually put money up front to help someone to develop a product or service that may not already even exist at that particular point. I'll talk a bit about the sales aspect of it in terms of when I look at the next category, which is a minimum viable product. But before I do that, here are some sources that you can use to find out more information on customer development. A couple of key books here: Steve Blank's book, Four Steps to the Epiphany, which the book in which he outlined initially customer development concepts. but also founder-centric. Have used a book called the Mom Test, which is about how you talk to customers and learn. The idea behind that is that it's a way of asking a question that would get an honest response, even from your mother, who one hopes will be trying to always say the kind of things that you'd want to hear. So there are some really good videos and websites as well. I'd recommend having a look at these. The bottom one is the one I showed you earlier about the questions. Rob Fitzpatrick's video is particularly good in talking about how to apply customer development in a very practical kind of way. The final tool that I want to talk about is minimum viable product, or MVP. The MVP is really an experiment. So it's a product with the minimum set of features that enable you to get a positive or negative response from an early adopter. The principle behind it is that early adopters are people who are going to be people who would probably take on a product at as early as possible stages, and they're the ones you're looking to work with initially. The more data, so it's based on actually collecting data on people's behavior in a kind of structured way. So it's learning based on customer behavior, on actual behaviors, but backed up by data. So an MVP really is a product with a minimum set of features to enable you to get an honest response from customers. An example of how this could potentially work, there is an online travel website which was launched with all the full infrastructure there, but it got absolutely no traffic. Now they could have tested the response to the initial website without building the full infrastructure. As it was, they spent a lot of money on building the infrastructure to find out that actually the basic concept that they were behind the service was fundamentally flawed. So MVPs link in with what I've got, what I mentioned earlier, as it helps you to complete, it's a key part of the feedback loop. And it also obviously ties in very closely with customer validation stage at customer development. A couple of things to remember about an MVP. It will never be as good as the real product. It's not actually, you're not actually launching the product in terms of getting sales and bringing in money. What you're looking to do is to learn about people's responses to it. So it is an experiment, and that's a very distinct difference between the first stage of a fully launched product. So different sort of types of MVP. These could be a landing page, which is simply a page on a website which enables you to see how people will respond in relation to that particular initial page. It could be the early version of a product, or it could be a model or a prototype. I think it's probably best to show you some examples to illustrate this. I mentioned a landing page first of all. This is an example of a landing page. Buffer, some people may be familiar with. Buffer is a service which enables you to manage your Twitter account more effectively. Now they started off with a single page which basically summarized the three things that you can do, or the three kind of key elements behind Buffer. I gave you the option of clicking on a plans and pricing button. If you did click on that, it took you to a page that said, hello, help, of course before we're ready, the service isn't ready yet. Using analytical tools, they could then assess how people responded to the basic proposition. So people were interested enough to be able to want to go and find out more. So the next stage was to add another page which offered three pricing options, from free to $5 and $20, and offered people the opportunity to find out more about those. When they clicked on one of those, they then were taken to the help page saying, help, we're not actually ready. Again, applying analytics, they could see from this what pricing options seemed the most attractive. So they're building on learning without actually having to spend a lot of money on developing a website. So they would now know that there's a level of interest in this kind of pricing range. Another example is a video. Dropbox, many people will use it as a kind of file sharing and document management service. They initially didn't launch the full service. They launched a video which showed what the particular product or service, how Dropbox would actually operate, and offers people the opportunity to sign up for the product or service when it was launched. And they got a significant response, like 70,000 sign-ups, and that told them that people were interested. So then they could go out and develop the full product. Another type of MVP could be the Wizard of Oz, and Wizard of Oz is a term that's used because people who are familiar with the film, you have a very small guy behind a screen, but working something which looks far, far bigger and more impressive than the kind of quite basic setup behind the screen. The idea behind this is that you launch a product or service that looks fully formed, but in fact, behind the scenes, you've still got something which is pretty basic. The example here is Zappos Shoe Shop. It's an online shoe retailer. And there are many issues around online selling of shoes. The fact people can't try them on, things like that. So they initially launched a page which looked like a fully formed website and service. But they went away, but rather than building all the infrastructure for supplying the service, they simply took pictures, went to a local shoe shop, took pictures of shoes, put them up online, and when orders came through, they went along to the shoe shop, bought the shoes, packaged them up, and sent them to the customers. And clearly, this isn't a particularly cost-effective model as a long-term business, but what they did learn was that people bought a number of different sizes. So rather than buying just one size, they bought maybe 2 or 3 sizes, so they could try them on and return the ones that didn't fit so well. This told them that they would need to build in an easy and cost-effective returns policy and procedure into their final service model. So when they actually went ahead and invested in the infrastructure, they did so on the basis of an understanding of how people will actually behave in relation to their service. A final example, crowdfunding in it is kind of a classic MVP in that, as I mentioned before, people are actually committing money up front for something which hasn't even been developed yet. And the classic example here is the Pebble ePaper watch, which brought in which looked to bring in $100,000 and brought in $10 million. So crowdfunding clearly is a classic MVP. So crowdfunding platforms like Kickstarter, Indiegogo can be used as an MVP. So that covers I'm going to race through Lean Startup and some of the concepts behind it. This final slide with this slide certainly shows you a number of the key sources that you can go to. There's lots of information out there. I mean, you can put the term into any kind of web search engine, and you'll get a huge response back. So here are some examples of some of the really useful videos and websites. The bottom of the list of web sources are some videos from LeanConf, which took place in November 2014 in Manchester. A whole selection of really good videos on Lean Startup. LeanConf is being held again in Manchester November this year, and so I would recommend you look at the possibility of attending that if you're interested, because you'll see a large number of excellent speakers in a very, very kind of informal and collaborative environment, and enjoyable, but also very informative as well. We're looking to do more with Lean Startup at the British Library. So this is a webinar that we have here. A lot of the books I'll be mentioning are available within our collections. We're looking to see what we can do in terms of offering more in-depth training on areas like customer development as well. So just watch this space. If we can, the more that we can offer in this area, the more we will try to, the more that we will be developing over the next few months. Final quotes, a few quotes from Eric Ries. summarize some of the key elements. Lean thinking defines value as providing benefit to the customer. Everything else is waste. Key element behind this is, behind lean startup, is that you don't develop or you don't introduce features and elements into a product or service which people don't actually value, because that's obviously wasteful from your point of view and adds nothing in terms of people's likelihood to purchase or use a product. An emphasis again on learning. All of these tools emphasize the more that you learn, the more chance your business is likely to be successful. If you don't know what you're testing, all the results in the world will tell you nothing, because it's kind of back to the idea of assumptions. So throughout the process of developing a new idea, you have to be able to measure and test and know what it is you're actually looking to test at every stage. The final point emphasizes the sustainable business around a vision, which is very much around the fact that people will actually pay for a particular product or service. That you might have something which people really like, but if they're not prepared to pay for it, and you'll not be able to build a sustainable vision. So a key element of lean is also identifying people's behaviors in terms of whether they will actually spend money. If there's anything here that needs a bit of clarification, I can't probably go into answering really in-depth questions at this particular point. If there's anything else that isn't particularly clear, please type your answer in now. Obviously, also, that's my email address, so I'm quite happy to engage in sort of discussion offline as well. So if you've got a question you want to put to me, please ask. One thing about the way that this online software works is some of the questions can be actually quite difficult to read. So if I don't answer your question, it may be that I haven't actually seen it. So can I so yeah, I've got a question here called, so can you clarify the crowdfunding MVP? I think the whole point behind that was that crowdfunding is a way of being able to get investment, whether it's actual money or whether it's through the equity model upfront before you develop a particular product or service. So the reason why it ties in with the MVP idea is that you can set out what your product or service will actually offer, and people will respond to that potentially with money. So it fits in with the minimum aspect, because you're not actually having to develop anything yourself to do it, but you are getting information back in a very tangible way about how people value that particular product, because they're actually prepared to put money up front to allow you to be able to produce it, and in many cases to have the opportunity to be one of the first people to be able to purchase it. Crowdfunding is obviously, there's a number of different models, and it can be used in all sorts of sectors, from the arts through to the tech sector. But I think the key part of it is that it's about people committing up front in a very tangible way to something which you have presented to them, something that you want to do or to develop. I hope that makes sense. Okay, well, I haven't got any more questions, so if I haven't been able to answer any of your questions, because again there can be problems with the way this the Citrix software presents the questions online, please do contact me through my email address. As I said, we'll be sending out. It'll be a version of the presentation without some of the images to keep the file size down. Thanks very much for attending today. I hope, please go and have a look at some of the sources I mentioned. I think you'll find some of them entertaining, but also very informative as well. Thanks very much, and have a great day, everybody.